Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another installment of Featured with Three Left Feet, the platform where we like to get to know local creatives and artists in the Northwest. Today, I'm joined by a friend. Caela, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Caela Price, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist working, for now at least, primarily in film and writing. But I'm trained in the theatre, and once this whole deadly pandemic is over, it's where I'd really love to return.
Woo! Thank you so much for joining us today, Caela.
Oh, you're very welcome.
You kind of answered this already, but we like to start off every interview with this. Art is such a broad term and practice, but how would you particularly define yourself as an artist?
I think it's often the idea comes first, and then I go to whatever form that idea needs to be put in. So it's oftentimes I just have to learn something from scratch to do. So I've worked in 3D animation, I've worked in 2D animation, I've worked in visual arts, sound, theatre, and film. So it's just following wherever what's available and what's fitting for the idea.
How do you find that idea then? So you said like the idea takes you to whatever the end result is. Where do you find that initial first point then?
It often comes from something like dreams or altered states of consciousness or psychoses or paranoias,
Hmm.
in terms of how I begin an idea. Or it might just be that I see something that's really fascinating and I want to respond to it in some way. So
Hmm.
it's either very, very inward or very, very outward,
Yeah.
in terms of where the idea comes from. Um, my last play that was produced, Maidenhead Stutter, was written in a state of sleep deprivation, uh, basically as a response to voices that would come up and kind of speak through me.
Hmm. Awesome. And for people watching, where are you based right now? And how did you get started in this practice?
I'm currently based in Lancaster. I don't know why I'm looking outside to confirm that, but I am. Um, I'm currently based in Lancaster, and I plan to stay here for at least a few more years. But I'm from Worcester, which is a
Nice.
bit further down south. Uh, and I guess I just ended up here kind of just because Lancaster University was a great place to be.
Hmm.
I met some great people. I did some great things. Uh, and I think I've just stuck here. It's a nice place.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh, do you see the potential of Lancaster as like an arts hub? Is that why you've
Yeah,
chosen to stay?
I mean, there's a lot of little theaters. There's a lot of artists around here, and there's a big community both of artists and queers.
Mm.
So it's a great place to be,
Mhm.
and it's also I think just far enough from the hustle and bustle of a big city to where you can get some time to focus on your own ideas without
Yeah.
being interrupted by something. So it's that kind of perfect blend.
Yeah. I feel that as well. I feel like it has all the animities, I think that's right, of being in a city, but then there's also so much lovely nature and like parks and reserves around for you to just center yourself when you need to kind of focus on your work.
Yeah, I mean it's a 5 minute, 10 minute walk out to the countryside in any direction, and
Yeah,
that's really quite refreshing.
yeah, it's lovely. Um, so when you first got started, like, how did you find your way into this sort of practice? Because obviously you said you do a bit of animation, you do digital work, you work in theatre. Were you drawn to anything in particular about digital art? I know that you
Hmm.
do writing as well, but
Hmm.
why that form of writing? Why that style? Was it easy to express yourself in that way?
So there's actually a bit of a story here.
Please tell.
Yeah, I've always been writing ever since I was a wee kid, and it was about like first year of uni that as you do when you're young and idealistic in university, you want to try everything.
Hmm.
And I wanted to try kind of expanded poetry that was not necessarily read, quote unquote, in the typical way, and that opened my mind to a lot of new things, a lot of new places, and a lot of new artistic ideas. And then I started to pack my poetry so densely that it basically became visual art. And from
Hmm.
there, I kind of spanned out into other things. Also, there's a book that I read in A level called Blood Electric by Kenji Suratori, of which I now have, I believe, the only signed copy. Uh,
Oh, all right.
I ended up becoming friends with the guy who wrote it, Kenji Suratori,
Cool.
and I think that's what really made me want to become a digital artist. Was
Hmm.
following what people were working on in the 2000s and the early 2010s, and wanting to see where we can go past that.
Hmm.
And also, just I'm online a lot, even before this pandemic.
Yeah. Did you find that there was then like an easy kind of transition then from doing art before? Because obviously now art is very digital because of the pandemic. Did you find that background was able to help you?
I had a great difficulty actually.
Oh, okay.
Because the way that I saw a lot of my digital work at the time was about translating spaces of the real, like, places we navigate, people we talk to, into some kind of digital abstraction. And it basically, the well dried up in terms of that because we weren't going anywhere, we weren't doing anything. So I really had to kind of change tack and uh, I mean, even just now, I'm really starting work on another series of text that is drawn from like spam websites,
Hmm.
because I think that's the prominent form of motion now is kind of pinging and poking and getting annoyed, and I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we all know a thing or two about frustration during during this time.
Oh God, don't tell me about it.
Is there any advice that you wish you had when you first got started?
When I first got started, don't get too caught up on the definitions of what you do.
Hmm.
Don't feel too limited by what your form is, and don't think that just because you're trained in one thing that you can't do another thing. One thing I've learned this year, I've been doing film, right? And I had not at any point in my life before this attempted film, just at all. And so I thought, well, I can't have anything useful to say. I'm not trained in it the way I'm trained in theatre and writing.
Hmm.
But I made a few things that were well-ish received by some people that I admire, and um, I think it's just like don't be afraid to try new things. I think that's obvious. Oh, the other thing is ask people, ask people to collaborate with you, ask people for advice, no matter
Yeah.
how big they are, no matter how unlikely it is that they'll get you back. It doesn't hurt anyone to send off an email, a tweet, or a message.
Hmm.
And most artists are much more willing to work with small artists and upcoming artists than you think they would be.
Yeah. I think that's really useful. I think that's good for like emerging artists and creatives, and also kind of what we want to achieve through Featured is we want to bring artists together. And speaking of that, who do you want to collab with, like right now or in the future?
I guess there are like people I want to collab with. I want to continue my collaborations with Kenji Suratori, um, obviously. Uh, Apart from that, I mean, there are people who I would like have a dream collaboration with, people who I would love to work with, but whom I have no realistic chance of doing so. People like Ryan Tricarton and James Ferraro and Rosa Megman and a few other kind of film and theatre people, and of course the inimitable Robert Wilson, who I hope to just meet one day, and gleam some joyous moment of beauty.
I mean, it's good to dream big.
It is,
Yeah.
but in terms of that, you know, like I don't have collaborations in mind for I don't want to say for local people, but in terms of like I'm willing to collaborate with whoever comes along. You know, I love the idea of bouncing an idea back and forth. So even if an artist is completely outside my kind of wheelhouse, doing something completely different to me, I love going to them and trying to see where the meeting point of those ideas are, because you
Yeah.
often produce something really beautiful out of that.
It's really great when you have two different perspectives from art, or two different like styles kind of coming together, and you can cherry pick or meet in the middle. It's really great when both parties are open to kind of like seeing what we can create, and that's really cool that that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, it gets you out of your own head, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. What barriers have you had to overcome? And I'm going to put this in a two-parter. So, before the pandemic, were there any particular challenges or difficulties you came across when trying to, find your creative path? And also now, through the pandemic, what barriers have you had to come across?
So, before the pandemic, I mean, I was working in basically a different form. I was working in theatre, and the advice I would give to anyone who wants to be a creative in theatre, that is to say a writer, a choreographer, a director, etc., is to practice sounding like you know what you're talking about. Um, because as a secret, most directors don't. Some very masterful ones will have a very cloudy, vague idea, but most of them will arrive to what they want through feel. And you need to give people the confidence uh, to be willing to explore that with you, right? To not
Yeah.
feel like, but also to not feel like they're doing all the creative work.
Have you had times where you felt like you were in that position then before? Where,
Yeah, I think it's been just in my work previously with my not my theatre group, the theatre group of which I am a part, Sincerity, which sadly has been on hiatus during this whole pandemic, um, and with various other projects where I've been called upon to be some kind of leader. I mean, this is much working past your own emotional demons, um, and kind of putting that at the side, but not just becoming cold about it.
yeah.
It's a very delicate balance.
I think that's something that most creatives feel though, right? Like we
Mm.
have that thing where we want to put that our work out there, but then because we're so desperate for it to be a certain standard, we have that like imposter syndrome, we have that doubt. And I think, like you said, it is about overcoming it and actually, yeah, making that statement of like, no, this is my baby and I'm going to put it out there.
Mm. But I question this whole "this is my baby" thing. A piece of
Oh,
advice I
okay.
would also give to younger artists is to not get too precious about your own work.
Yeah.
Because if you're married to, there's this quote from David Foster Wallace, I'm probably butchering it here, but he says that if you're too married to the perfect idea in your head, you'll never actually get anything out.
Yeah.
Um, and I very much fostered the mindset of I get something done enough, you know, to where I think that it's doing something, and then I edit it, I refine it a little bit, and then I put it away, and I start working on a new thing. If you make five things, each one has, say, a 5% chance of sticking, you've probably not made anything stick. If you make 100 things and they have 5% chance of sticking, you've
Yeah.
made five things that stick.
Yeah.
Which means that you have the same amount of things that stick if you've got 100% on that thing that you've worked years on. This isn't to say to rush your work, but I'm saying uh, don't feel like your work has to be perfect for it to be affecting or powerful or resonant.
I think that's something that I need to maybe get into my head a little bit is, yeah. But also, I like what you said about, yeah, not being married to the idea in your head, because I think that's the beauty of collabing with other artists, right? Is that you put some idea out, but then when you get other people's points of view, you can create something that you didn't even envision. And that's the beauty of it. You said a little bit about sincerity. Could you talk a little bit about, obviously, I know at the moment it's been on hold, but before, could you talk about sincerity?
Sincerity is an experimental theatre troupe. First and foremost, we're all writers and we all work in roles of creative direction as well. It's me and two other artists that are local, Samuel Pye and Melissa Holmes.
Yes.
Um,
Who I may know.
yeah, there may be some bias in this interview. And Samuel Pye is the founder. And we kind of got our start completely by chance. We were all working together on a project where we'd just been assigned, and we found that we really hit it off. And I think it's through that I learned a lot of these lessons about not being too precious, because one of the joys about working together is that you can argue about your ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think having to defend your idea makes you have a better idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've done how many plays? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think 4.
Mm-hmm. One of which went to Fringe, right?
Yeah, one of which went to Fringe. That was an adaptation of the play The Experiment, which we kind of molded and adapted and massaged and expanded, because we don't like to see the work as a kind of static object. We like to see all the different directions it can go. We love improvising, and Sam is a brilliant improviser, and brilliant in many other ways, as is Melissa. And it's something I'd really love to get back to. I think I've only written one play over quarantine, just because it's hard to write unless you have people that are talking to each other.
Yeah. Is that a barrier that you think like over quarantine you've had then, like for writing? Has it been a little bit tricky?
Yeah, I think in quarantine time, I mean, the advice for writers, right, is to often just like go to a cafe and like get a coffee and just listen to people speak, or just observe people, and that's become a lot harder, both because I think there's obviously the explicit thing of we're in lockdown, and so we shouldn't be in the urban hustle and bustle.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think there's been a more implicit social change about distance and observation, right? It isn't just that, we can spread COVID to each other, even if we're wearing masks, so we should keep apart. But I think it's made people a lot more private.
Yeah.
A lot less willing to let slip the things that would be very useful to a writer. So I think it's probably incumbent for writers of the next 5-10 years to be looking at the other ways in which people are communicating right now.
Yeah.
And I think that might make something more useful out of this pandemic than the initial knee-jerk response, which is to write about the pandemic. So I guess the advice is there's always people talking, there's always people communicating, you can't stop that. But now especially you need to constantly be looking for new ways that people communicate. And I think that was the barrier for quarantine for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So for writing, is that how you get your inspiration then, through like observing dialogue and observing like communication?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I'm in a very particular corner of Twitter where I actually enjoy it. I would not recommend getting a Twitter for most people. I wouldn't recommend getting a Twitter for myself if I could go back, but now I'm stuck.
It is a good platform for finding people and connecting and stuff,
It
though.
is like it's like useful. This isn't to slight Twitter as a resource. I think it's really. I mean, that's part of why I'm there is because it's got great use, but
Hmm.
as a place, it's not fun. I think my practice has come out of the ways that people talk online in various spaces, the things that
Hmm.
people are talking about, and the way is the way that people talk. But what's been really inspiring me recently is the way that machines talk to each other. There are like a lot of websites that generate large amounts of ostensibly useless text that is
Hmm.
not readable mostly by humans, or it is not intended to be read by humans. But the purpose of it is to sit behind another website and yoink it up in the Google rankings.
Hmm.
So actually, you have two machines talking to each other in this kind of actually quite complex dialogue that doesn't really have any real reference in human speech.
Yeah.
And that slowly formed a series that I'm working on right now called The Files I Want, which was named after the first site where I ever discovered this, which is sadly now taken down. Um, because these sites shuffle around and they're temporary. So yeah, I guess that's the thing. It's just there's always chatter, and it's your
Hmm.
job as a writer or as an artist, really, because you're always reflecting something in life,
Yeah.
um, to be attentive to that and don't feel like you've lost something because the way that you have to understand that has changed.
You mentioned briefly a little bit about what you're working on right now, but what in general are you have you been cooking up in the brain of Caela Price?
It's been between working on a few things, though things have slowed significantly because of my academic work that I have to do. Because
Hmm.
I'm working on my film MA right now, and I'm preparing for a PhD in the fine arts.
That's
Um,
amazing.
it's just nothing. I got
It's nothing.
in terms of what I'm working on right now. I mean, I have the Twitter account and now an associated Instagram account, both under the name $_dollar. That's with zeros instead of O's. Um, and I like to keep that fairly separate from me, the person.
Hmm.
Like I don't shy away from telling people that I run it, but I don't
Hmm.
let it spill out back into promoting me or
Hmm.
um, whatever. And I've been working on maybe 3 or 4 series on that intermittently, depending on when things strike me. I literally just yesterday put out something new, a first in a series called Dedications, which is kind of longer form, much more narrativized version of the files I want.
Oh, that'll be out then by the time this interview goes
Oh,
out. So
yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's out by the time we're recording.
yeah.
I just intend to do it as and when the opportunity strikes me because it takes a lot of digging to find a website that does what I want it to do in an interesting enough way. I've been fascinated with. Have you heard about this new thing about VTubers, virtual YouTubers?
Hmm.
I've been fascinated with this as a
It's
kind
weird.
of real new way that people are communicating, right? This kind of return of the avatar and the persona.
Hmm.
And I just have particular ones that I've been following, and I'm going to be end up writing about in my PhD. So
Oh,
it's
awesome.
technically research, I swear.
No, it happens though. We find ourselves down these routes, and that's sometimes where we find
Yeah.
inspiration from.
Don't be afraid of falling down a rabbit hole. Those are the
Yeah.
most beautiful things for inspiration.
Hmm. So is that what the dollar Instagram is? Is that like a persona, like an avatar?
Yeah, I mean, I basically did it because I wanted to. There were certain projects that I'd initially planned for Instagram, like a series called Facework, which is reworked selfies, um, and hyperized and glitched and reconfigured in a quite abstract way. And that was initially going to be on Instagram,
Hmm.
but I decided, just kind of on a whim really, that it would be on Twitter instead, because I already
Hmm.
had the Twitter set up and I hadn't had Instagram set up. So now I just want to cross post on both of those. But
Hmm.
yeah, Dollar Dollar is something kind of separate from me. I'm writing a series of plays. I
Awesome.
need one of which is Maidenhead Stutter, which is out. You can find it on my Bandcamp, which is dollar dash dollar dot bandcamp.com, called Maidenhead Stutter, which was also performed locally and for
It
which I did the
was.
soundtrack.
It was. It was very good.
It,
You also wrote a play called, no, you directed as well. You've done your directing work
mm.
for Tongues, which was 2 years ago, I believe.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So for context, yeah, Caela, for sincerity, directed a little mini play, which I was very fortunate to be a part of, and it's how I know Caela. But back to what you're
Mm.
working on right now, then.
Yeah, the play, it's going to be a series of three plays, one of which is released, called Maidenhead Stutter. The other
Hmm.
which is written, and a an excerpt has been published on Burning House Press, called PH Vivian. Um, and the third one was initially going to be something that I had a very specific idea for and had started on, but then the lockdown happened.
Ah,
So I I was writing it, and then I realized that this is immediately going to be read as a lockdown play, because the
hmm.
play was initially about two people stuck in a room, stuck in basically a bunker in the apocalypse, and then I realized this is a bit too close to home now.
Ah, crazy how that worked out then.
Oh yeah. Recently I've been working on a series inspired by my dreams,
Awesome.
where I'm kind of condensing and combining dreams into a kind of free form poetry, and that's in its really early stages. But I'm liable to do basically anything that catches my interest, and I will plug myself. My commissions are open. If you want to buy face work, DM me on Twitter and or Instagram, and I will negotiate a price or whatever's reasonable for you.
Awesome. Well, we want people to get in touch with each other and network. So yeah, this is really awesome. Um, I mean, we've touched on this already, but we can expand on it in a bit more detail. What do you think the main issues artists are facing in this current climate?
Yeah, I think it's a question of adaptation. Artists, myself included, often develop a practice so that they can get a certain routine going, right? So it often involves not just the actual moment at which you're putting pen to paper or putting brush to canvas or
Hmm.
whatever your medium requires, um, but a certain kind of routine around that. And what quarantine has done has broken that.
Hmm.
So it's going to be two things. One is creating new routines. I guess maybe we're on the tail end of this pandemic,
Hmm.
so not as
Hopefully.
useful now as it might have been about a year ago. But creating routines that allow us to navigate in new ways this pandemic and allow us to create things that are going, yes, to be different, but still worthwhile and are attentively listening. The other thing is now creating routines that are able to then merge with what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months, right? As quarantine supposedly is easing.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think it's just a problem of adjustment.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's now more than ever that it's incumbent on artists to be really flexible about how they work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think flexibility is the absolute main thing. So obviously you are in Lancaster, you're studying in Lancaster and in the Northwest. Why do you feel keeping, because this project is really about elevating artists in the Northwest area. What do you see the potential as Lancashire and the Northwest as a kind of artistic hub, and why do you think it's so important to keep art alive in general, but also particularly in this area?
Well, I guess there are two answers to that question. The first is that we're right by the Lake District, and that is where English, like, seriously, that's where English Romanticism comes into being, right? You have
Yeah.
Wordsworth, Coleridge, etc. They all come up here to see these beautiful vistas and write, some of the greatest poems in the English language. And a lot of artists have been inspired by Lancashire and the surrounding area, in terms of what comes here and what goes here. And that's, it's its own reason as to why Lancashire and the Northwest is good for art. The
Hmm.
reason why I think it's important to promote art in Lancashire and the Northwest is that I think too much, like, maybe proportionally not, but in terms of percentage wise, too much focus goes on art produced in the industrial hubs of, well, let's say England for this part. So let's say Scotland, Birmingham, etc. all have these huge initiatives to promote their local art scene.
Hmm.
And a lot of the artists I know who are working in and around the Northwest are working basically in spite of a complete lack of support. Yeah, funding, support. We're working for the pure love of the craft. And I think that produces its own kind of work. And I think that deserves, attention. It deserves um, focus, and it
Hmm.
deserves exposure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also, there's a real culture, there's a real community in this area. And like you said, it is purely that drive is just because of a love for their, like you said, a love for their craft. And I think that's something that's really quite special.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's and
Um,
it's wonderful to uh, find this common ground between the other people that we've spoken to as part of this series as well. Is that there is that just that love for this area, and yeah, even if it is the landscape and stuff, it's that inspiration, and it's awesome that you've decided to kind of yes find your ground here. So it's really
I
cool.
mean, there's very few things as beautiful as watching the sun set over the bay from Williamson Park. And I count myself greatly fortunate to be able to get something like that.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
If you haven't come to the Northwest, if you're listening to this from elsewhere, I would highly recommend in less strange times that you come up here and visit because it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yes, promotion. Yes. This is a bit of a broad question, but we've had a few of these so far, so I don't think it's anything new. Where do you want to see the industry go in the next 5 years, and where do you see yourself in it?
There's been a lot of talk recently about the way that art is sold.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you've been following this whole new thing, NFTs, where people are basically creating phony receipts for art that has ostensibly no value because it's infinitely reproducible. I think what I want to see is more support for the creation of art, more support for the process of making, and support that's more readily available that isn't based on selling an already nearly finished idea to someone.
Hmm.
More funding for the beginning of ideas, because that I think is the most beautiful part of the process. And just, more ability to live without the pressure to make something that you have to sell.
Hmm.
Because I think that really changes what kind of art you make.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you're creating something with a business mindset, you do have that business mindset of like, well, what's going to get the greatest financial transaction. Whereas if you are creating for just the love of creating, there's a lot more soul in it. I mean, not to dispute that there isn't soul in
Hmm.
art, just as a business. But yeah, I think I think you've hit the mark because we definitely need a lot more support on that grassroots level and the beginnings and just just having more support for people experimenting and finding their creativity.
In the second half of that question, in terms of where I see myself in 5 years, I don't know. I'm something of a nomad. I just like wandering around and seeing where I'm at. So I also don't know if it's particularly healthy for an artist to, unless they have a very particular project that they want to spend a very long time on, to think of their own career in that long term stance. Because I think if you think of your art in terms of a career, then you often pass up things that might not be immediately obviously like useful to you, but that down the line might end up being the most valuable things that you've done, forming connections. And so, I think art is all about being open, being receptive, and that means just following whatever comes.
I think that's a really beautiful statement to end on. Caela, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. It's been a pleasure talking to you. If people want to reach out to you and find you, what are your socials? How can people get to know Caela Price better?
So I'm on Twitter at VideoFemme. That's video FEMME. And I recently am on Instagram at $_dollar, same as my Twitter, my art Twitter. My email, if you want to hit me up for any longer form questions, is caelaprice@gmail.com. And I'm very open to working with whoever wants to work or whoever just wants to talk.
And all of Caela's socials and links will be provided with the blog, which will be released shortly. Again, thank you so much, Caela, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who is watching and keeping up with the series. We really appreciate it. If you are yourself a creative and an artist in the Northwest and you would like to be featured with us, Three Left Feet, please email us at featured@threeleftfeet.co.uk. That is FEETURED at threeleftfeet.co.uk. So thank you very much for joining. Caela, thank you so much for talking, and we hope to see you next time for our next artist. Take care, everyone.
Sure,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.